Hello, good morning. Welcome to Gaming Insight Daily for Friday, September 19th, 2025. This is your sometimes daily show of gaming news, accessibility news, or updates about my life. I have coffee in my tea Earl Grey hot mug today. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be doing an episode today because there's really a lot of a lot of news that is worth sort of diving into a larger discussion. But there was one article I was trying to be able to find some news stories to talk about that I wanted to, that prompted me sort of like going down this sort of thought path that I think is kind of worth asking or at least talking about. And it has to do with Hollow Knight Silksong, and it has to do with the difficulty, but it doesn't actually have to do with accessibility and difficulty modes. It's something I thought of, and I was like, yeah, I think this might be worth a discussion, and like kind of sort of giving a broader context to the video game industry. So let's jump into the article. This actually came from GameSpot.com. This is written by Levi Winslow. The article is called "Silksong is harder than Hollow Knight, and it's Hornet's fault." Now, this article, I won't go into sort of the reading out the entire article here, because basically the article, there was the developers from Team Cherry kind of talked about essentially that they had to revamp a lot of the enemies because Hornet is a lot more nimble and a lot more quicker than the original, than Hollow Knight. So they had to change the enemy sort of behavior and make them a little bit more difficult because the Hornet was essentially that much of a better character. But there was one paragraph here that I think, or that I wanted to be able to mention, or at least talk about, because it kind of, this is what brought me down this thought path. So it starts off with that explains why. Hold on, let me start actually a little bit further. The basic Ant Warrior is built from the same moveset as the original Hornet boss. Pelin added. The same core set of dashing, jumping, and dashing down at you, plus we added the ability to evade and check you. In contrast to the Knight's enemies, Hornet's enemies had to have more ways of catching her as she tries to move away. That explains why you may find some regular grunts impenetrable in Silksong as you flip over and dive into their skulls, but what about bosses like the Savage Beast Fly or Sister Splinter? Team Cherry doesn't have as neat an answer here, but Gibson believes that the myriad of quote-unquote choices at your disposal should alleviate the pain. Quote, the important thing for us is that we allow you to go way off the path, Gibson said. So one player may choose to follow it directly to its conclusion, and then another may choose to constantly divert from it and find all the other things that are waiting and all the other ways and routes. Silksong has more moments of steep difficulty, but part of allowing a higher level of freedom within the world means that you have choices all the time about where you're going and what you're doing. And if, say, the Widow is kicking your face in, Team Cherry isn't too worried about you because of the quote-unquote choices the Metroidvania genre inherently offers you. Gibson explained there are more options than simply banging your head against a particularly tough boss. That's fine, he said. Players have ways to mitigate the difficulty via exploration or learning or even circumventing the challenge entirely rather than getting stonewalled. And this prompted me to think about basically a conversation that I think we are missing when it comes to at least these kind of games. Are we doing enough to be able to bring in new players to the video game industry? Are we gatekeeping new players from wanting to be able to jump into video games and play them? Because, and the reason why it made me think about this is in regards to Silksong. Okay, so yeah, the Metroidvania genre is something that I think we're pretty all familiar with. It is generally a genre of you are exploring a map. You may come across a challenge that you don't know how to solve yet. You try and you fail, and then you realize, oh, I may need something else in order to be able to do. Like, I don't have the current skills or abilities to be able to do the thing I want to do here. I'm gonna remember to try to come back here, try to go a different route, learn a thing, and then I can come back and basically do the thing that I wanted to do. And that's kind of like the whole Metroidvania. It's like you learn by exploration, and you get more, but you get better as you explore. And Silksong is a very great example of a Metroidvania. It's because of the fact that when you come up across generally the challenges that a player faces is usually in regards to its bosses. So you try out a boss, you realize you can't really beat a boss, and you die over and over really quickly. So what's supposed to happen is that in your head you realize, oh, I need to just get better at the game in other ways, like find different skills or different abilities. So I'll go and explore and then come back, and then maybe I could be better at it. And it's the same could actually be even said for Elden Ring. Elden Ring is very much like that. It kind of takes the From Software formula of having to be able to beat a boss, which is its sort of genius level game design in that sense. But what Elden Ring does is that that's different than From Software. Is that From Software, you have to beat the boss in order to be able to move forward. In Elden Ring, you don't have to. You can basically try out a boss. If you feel like you're getting pummeled very quickly, you can leave, get better skills, get better abilities, get better weapons, and then you can come back, and hopefully that boss is not as challenging as it used to be. And that's all well and good for those games. And they become extremely popular in the video game space, generally because of that. But I'm wondering if we're doing enough to be able to bring people into this hobby, and teaching them teaching them the sort of the gameplay mechanics that we've just sort of grown up and become inherently it's easy to figure out because we've played a whole bunch of games. But I'm wondering if for someone who wants to be able to jump into, say, like Elden Ring or Silksong, because they hear about these games a lot, from their friends or what have you. I'm more kind of like leaning towards more kids in this aspect, but I'm also including adults in this, because they may have adults that have gamer friends that play a game, and they'd be like, oh, I want to try this game out. Oh, I heard this from my friend. I want to be able to jump in and play this. Same thing actually could be said, like, even if you like, not necessarily for Elden Ring or Silksong, but what about games like that are extremely popular in the mainstream market, like Madden or Call of Duty, because their friends play it and they try to jump in and they don't know what to do. They don't have the dexterity or the muscle memory of holding a controller and knowing how to be able to hit each button, or what each button does. Let alone or where the buttons are in the controller, let alone anything else. And it's not to say that I think that we need to be able to make easier games, or games that are like extremely easy so that people can be able to jump into. But I'm wondering if we're doing enough within the games that are becoming popular, whether we're doing enough to be able to onboard people, or are we gatekeeping ourselves, or are we gatekeeping other people from enjoying this hobby? Because I think that's kind of the sort of the unspoken thing about these kind of games, regardless of the difficulty curve and all that kind of stuff. Because I feel like that is already gatekeeping gamers from wanting to be able to jump into that, because it's kind of like more on an advanced level of understanding gameplay mechanics that you have to learn that language. So it's actually learning language is probably a good jumping on, like kind of a good analogy here. Okay, so when you're learning a language for the first time, you have to kind of start with the basics, right? You have to kind of start with like the specific vocabulary, the letters, phonetics. Like, you have to kind of start small as you're learning a new language, and then as you get better, you're understanding a little bit more of the grammar. You're understanding a little bit more of how to be able to pronounce and how to be able to sort of find the accent within that language. And then as you get better, then you become more fluent in that language. Video games is a very similar thing. When you jump into the gaming hobby for the first time, you're generally trying to be able to find games that are relatively easier or not necessarily hugely challenging to get into. So I don't want to say like any sort of like kids game, but I'd say like a cozy game would probably be a good sort of way to jump in. Or maybe even I would even say maybe even like a Spider-Man from like it is. Yeah, you do have to kind of learn how to build this. Actually, no, Spider-Man probably the example for the next step up. But I think like a game like Madden or like a sports game, like something like that. Like essentially, you can be able to jump into. It's simplified controls. You're able to relatively pick it up. Like you're understanding how the game kind of works. You're learning how to use the controls, and then you can get a step up into. I've even heard this kind of term like frictionless games, where games like Spider-Man, we'll go back into that, or like a God of War or something like that, where essentially, yeah, you maybe die once or twice here and there, and it can be challenging, but essentially, like you can pretty much pick up where you last left off, and then maybe you won't die for another like an hour or two or something like that. So it's supposed to be like the game is just sort of as frictionless as possible. Some people may even sort of equate that to accessibility, where accessibility is creating a frictionless environment. And I don't think that's like, I think that's a different sort of analogy that isn't really apt. I think accessibility still is just equal access to the same type of game. It's not making it frictionless. It's just basically removing some barriers that physically a person may have that they can't or sort of quote unquote overcome. So then you have those kind of frictionless games, and then as you get fluent in the language of video games, then there are those games like an Elden Ring, like a Silksong, like even a Metroid or something like that, like something that involves multiple different types of gameplay mechanics understanding in order for you to be able to learn how to be able to play. And if you're not fluent in that language, then the game becomes a lot more challenging because you're trying to be able to speak that language at a fluent level, and you're not there yet. And I'm wondering if we're doing enough to try to be able to bridge that gap, as it were. We grew up with playing games like Metroidvanias. Like literally, if you take Castlevania and Metroid, those are the two games that basically got combined together and is now a full-blown genre. That is something that basically we learned as kids or growing up as we were playing these games. We understand a Metroid. We understand a Castlevania. Let's combine the two because we understand how the gameplay works. We're evolving our language. We're evolving our way to communicate within these types of games. And I'm wondering we're not doing enough to be able to bridge that gap because everyone talks about Elden Ring, everyone talks about Silksong, and I know that basically it could be just within our own bubble, and I think that it's kind of hard to be able to think about anyone outside of that bubble per se. But I think that we're not like again, it kind of brings up the question: are we gatekeeping our hobby because of you want to understand it because you have to understand these mechanics? Because if you think about it, when you go into Silksong, this whole thing about what the Team Cherry is saying is that when you go up against a boss, you have to then you have to realize at some point, without the game telling you to, that maybe this boss is like, you can be able to come back later because you can get better at the game, and then the boss isn't as difficult, right? But the game doesn't tell you to do that. The game just sort of inherently thinks that you should understand that. But that's the whole thing of like that means that we need to like the game is expecting you to be fluent in the language of gameplay mechanics in order for you to be able to figure it out. But if someone is just like, I've heard about this game called Silksong, I heard it's pretty good, I want to be able to jump in and play it, and then they do, and then they go up against a boss and they get frustrated and stop playing because, oh man, it was it's just too hard. This game is just too hard. I can't do this. And then they just stop. And then basically because they don't understand that you can go back, like you can leave and come back and come and defeat the boss later. Because again, it's that not to say we need to sort of handhold everybody as we're coming into this as into a game. I just think that we need to be more cognizant of that. that sometimes when people are jumping into a game, that may be their first game ever. And I don't have to say that basically we have to force players into like a very simplified tutorial or anything like that. I think that's where kind of options can come in. Where like if for instance, if Team Cherry decided to be like, okay, we want to be able to make this as approachable as possible. I don't want to say accessible because that's a whole other conversation, but let's just say approachable to as many people as possible. They could have basically like come up with a tutorial of like how to play. And it kind of goes through step by step of what you need to do to learn how to play, including learning how to be able to play a Metroidvania. I think of like Super Mario Maker is a good example. It's meant to basically like it's a game that you're meant to design a level, but what it does is that it also has a tutorial, sort of like almost like a course that you go through that you actually not only are learning how to be able to build a level, but you're also actually learning the philosophy of Nintendo's platforming like expertise, because one of the things that they teach you in there is that when you are introducing a gameplay mechanic for the first time, you first let them try it out, see what it's like, and then you introduce a challenge that where you have to use that new gameplay mechanic, and you solve that challenge, and then you advance to a more complicated challenge, or a little bit more advanced challenge from that. Basically, so you have to now think of a different way of approaching with that gameplay mechanic, and they teach you that as you progress throughout the level, without having to necessarily like tell the player how to do that. Mario is actually a good example of those kind of like onboarding games that are pretty much like are essentially simple to play. It's basically just run and jump. I mean, it's kind of why it's sort of like originally Mario was called Jumpman back in the day. And you learn, okay, like you learn relatively quickly. Oh, if I go up against a Goomba and I hit them, oh, I die. Okay, so if I can jump. What if I jump on them? Oh, that beats them up, or that kills them. Okay, I can now be able to move forward. Like I now understand what I need to do, and then there's more mechanics that get added on. Where I think that Silksong, in essence, it sort of does that, but again, it's not the game. There's a difference between the game just not telling you and the game onboarding you. And I think that when a game it doesn't tell you, it's assuming that you understand the fluency of the language of this game, whereas when the game is communicating it to you, then there's gaps of knowledge that the player, even regardless of how fluent they are, they just may not understand what it is you're trying to tell them. So you may have to add in some onboarding or add in some tool tips or what have you, in order to be able to kind of bridge that gap. I think like Ubisoft is great at that. And as much as they can be criticized for adding too many tool tips and too many hints to a game, it is meant to to be that kind of frictionless, being like, okay, if you get stuck, there is something that the game's going to tell you to be like, okay, if you want to get unstuck, this is what you have to do. But it's kind of teaching you how to be fluent within the language of that game as it goes. And and so as much as you think, oh, Ubisoft is kind of like it's hand holding, whatever, in a way, it's designed for as many players as possible, regardless of your experience with playing video games. And I know I'm throwing in a bunch of different examples, and I may sort of like my point kind of maybe one or I may not have like a sort of structured sort of thinking process. This is a stream of consciousness sort of discussion that I'm having here. But I think that the fear that I had about players about From Software games or Souls-like games or that they're gatekeeping players from wanting to enjoy that genre. I'm wondering if overall we may be gatekeeping just people from jumping into this hobby altogether, because we're encouraging games to be made that you have to be super fluent in video game gameplay mechanics in order to be able to play, but we're not doing enough to be able to create a game that is approachable by a lot of people. So I guess it kind of really is the thesis of this is that Are we making games that are approachable to as many players as possible? Again, accessibility is a whole other different conversation that I don't want to sort of muddle up in this, but that's why I say approachable. I don't think there's enough games that are approachable to new players so that they can be able to like jump in and enjoy this hobby, and then eventually get to the point where they can become fluent enough where they can play games like that. And I think that the more we praise and glorify games like Silksong or Elden Ring, I think we might be setting a not necessarily a great approachable example of what video games are like right now, or what video games can be. And we need to celebrate the ones that are bringing in new folks to the hobby, or bringing new folks in that they would never have been able to play. Like, I think we need those kind of genre those genre entry level points for people, so they can learn that language, become that fluent within that language. And I'm not saying we need simple kiddie like games in order to be able to do that. I think there are ways there to be able to incorporate approachability into a game that doesn't that can still cater to those who are fluent in it. I think that, again, that example of I thought of Silksong having like a how to play tutorial sections, completely optional, could have been just in the menu settings to be able to jump in, but it would have taught the player, oh, by the way, you go up against this boss, you might want to leave and come back, and then you can be able to defeat this boss. Like, if there's enough of an onboarding of that aspect of teaching those mechanics, then you might be able to get people, like, they understand that they don't need to be frustrated by a boss. They don't need to be frustrated by dying all the time to a boss or to an enemy. They know that they can leave and come back, or leave and explore a little bit and learn a little bit more, or find new items or stuff like that, and then come back, and then they feel more confident in it. Right now, I think that's the tricky part, is that the game is sort of assuming that you know this already, and it's assuming that you're going to eventually figure it out. And I think that's kind of why people sort of when they talk about this game is too difficult, I think that's part of the problem, is that it's not approachable to those players, to teach them like that, or that aha moment of, oh, I wonder if I can leave and come back, and then that boss is better. And it's like, and it's not to say that I don't want people to be able to not have that aha moment, because I think that that's also inherently a great thing for players. But again, it's that when you're not fluent in the language of that game, of these types of games, that aha moment may never come. And what do you do then? Do you just basically like, is it okay for a player to be able to get so frustrated by a boss, not have that aha moment, and then basically quit the game altogether? I feel like that's not giving the player enough credit, or also giving the player, or not giving the player basically a great experience or a fun experience, because video games are meant to be fun. Video games are meant to be like that sort of hobby, like, especially now in the way the world is at the moment. We need more games that are fun and enjoyable to play, not frustrating, not hitting you over the head with saying you need to figure out how to beat this game. No, we want games that are fun, and I think that if we are able to think of ways to be able to make a game approachable, I think that can be able to bring in new players, or players to the genre, new players to the hobby, or what have you. And also, as a side thing, if you make a game a little bit more approachable, you're also technically making the game a little bit more accessible. It's a sneaky way into that. Just saying. All right. I think that's kind of where all my thoughts on it, and I want to be able to hear your thoughts. What do you think of this discussion? Are we doing enough? Are we gatekeeping people from joining into this hobby? I'd love to be able to hear what you think. Leave me in the comment section down below, and I would love to be able to read your thoughts. That's gonna be for me today. Also for the weekend, I should be back again on Monday. I'm hoping to be able to do a few more games, get some gameplay impressions of some games that I have that I need to be able to play, and get some more game impressions, or at least reviews ready. Also next week will be my Ghost of Yote review. That'll be going up on the 25th, so stay tuned for that. But if you want to be able to keep up with what I'm doing, hit the subscribe button, and I would really appreciate it. It would help keep this channel growing. All right, take care. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.